I'll rewrite the story in the first person, following your instructions and splitting it into 5 parts. Here's part 1 of the rewritten version. Part 1. The proposal and the first rift. Ever thought a single joyous moment could unravel so much? But here I am, questioning everything. My name is Maramara, 27, and until recently I believed I had a strong bond with my older sister Camille, who's 30. Growing up, we were close, though there was always an unspoken rivalry between us. She was the achiever with everything planned out, while I took a more relaxed, go-with-the-flow approach. It worked for us, for the most part. Balance shattered when my boyfriend Jason proposed to me. It was a sunny Saturday and we had gone to our favorite park for what I thought was just another casual picnic. Halfway through, Jason knelt in front of me, ring in hand, and asked me to marry him. It wasn't grandiose, no photographers, no flash mobs, just us in our little bubble of happiness. I said yes immediately. Decided to share the news that evening during a family dinner that had already been planned. It seemed like the perfect opportunity. My parents, Camille, and her boyfriend Eric were all there. Over dessert, I showed off my ring, glowing with excitement. My parents were ecstatic, bombarding us with questions about the proposal and our future plans. Camille's reaction, though, was off. She congratulated us, sure, but her hug was stiff, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Get it off, assuming she was just tired. But as the evening wound down, she pulled me aside. For a moment, I thought she was about to offer a heartfelt sisterly message, something warm and encouraging. Instead, her words hit like a slap. Did you really need to rush into getting engaged? You knew I was waiting for my own proposal. Odd. Camille had been dating Eric for 7 years, but she'd never mentioned expecting a proposal soon. I tried to explain that Jason's proposal wasn't planned to overshadow her, but she rolled her eyes, accusing me of being selfish. The more I tried to reason with her, the more upset she got, saying things like, "You've always been so nonchalant about milestones, and now, when it's my turn, you suddenly care." Her care. Tongue. It felt like she was questioning whether I deserved to be happy. The tension only grew when my parents overheard our argument and stepped in, trying to mediate. Camille doubled down, claiming I'd overshadowed her long-anticipated plans. Jason, confused by the escalating argument, came over to check on me. But the night ended on a sour note. I barrel note that night, replaying the confrontation over and over. Was I really supposed to put my life on hold until Camille got engaged? Jason, too, felt terrible, blaming himself for the rift. The next morning, Camille's passive-aggressive social media posts started. Cryptic messages like, "Funny how some people can't let others have their moment." Our mutual friends and extended family began reaching out, asking if something had happened. I was at a loss for how to respond, when Mrs. Respond suggested I delay any wedding plans until Camille calmed down. I felt conflicted. Should I really have to pause my happiness for her? The days that followed only made it clear this wasn't going to blow over. Camille started avoiding family gatherings where she knew I'd be present. The tension between us solidified, and I couldn't help but wonder if I'd lost my sister for good. I tried to keep my head up, focusing on the excitement of being engaged to Jason, but Camille's behavior made it impossible to fully enjoy the moment. She started skipping family dinners and declining invitations to any gathering where I'd be. My parents noticed, but chalked it up to her needing space. They didn't seem to grasp how much her attitude was cutting me. Then came theme.agement party. Jason and I had planned a small celebration with close family and friends, a simple affair to mark the start of our journey. My parents urged me to delay it just until Camille felt better, but Jason and I agreed that it wasn't fair to put our lives on hold. Everything was set. A cozy venue, our favorite music playlist, and food from a caterer we loved. Camille loved making her grand entrance about an hour in, wearing a dress that could have easily passed for a wedding gown. She floated through the room like a storm cloud, offering forced smiles and avoiding eye contact with me. Still, I tried to include her, thinking maybe this could be a step toward mending things, but she wasn't having it. She barely spoke to anyone and spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone. Then came the phone. Jason gave a heartfelt speech, talking about how much he loved me and how excited he was for our future. It was sweet and genuine, and for a moment I forgot about all the drama. But as soon as he finished, Camille chimed in loudly. Wow, some people really love being the center of attention. The room fee attention. Nervous laugh rippled through the crowd before someone awkwardly changed the subject. Jason squeezed my hand under the table, his face a mask of calm, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. After the party, he pulled me aside and said, "Mara, we need to set boundaries with her. This isn't fair to you, or us." He was right. Camillus. Behavior was spiraling, and I didn't know how to rein it in. But before I could even process what to do next, things got worse. Camille started posting cryptic messages on social media, saying things like, "Real love doesn't need a spotlight," and "Some people will do anything to one-up you." Friends and extended family who saw the posts began messaging me, asking if I was okay or what was going on. I didn't know how to answer. What could I say without airing all the dirty laundry? The tipping point laundry? One of Jason's friends reached out, confused about a rumor that Jason had proposed to me on purpose to overshadow Camille. Apparently, she'd been telling people that our engagement was calculated, deliberately timed to steal her moment. That accusation hit me harder than I expected. Jason had no idea about Camille's unspoken expectations when he proposed, and the fact that she was painting him as some kind of villain enraged me. I decided to confront Cami directly. I asked her if she was spreading these rumors and why she couldn't just be happy for me. She scoffed, accusing me of playing the victim. "You always act like you're so laid back, but then you do stuff like this," she said. "Admit it, you knew I was waiting, and you just couldn't let me have my moment." I couldn't believe whammoment earring. "Camille," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Jason proposed because he loves me, not because of you. I'm sorry you feel this way, but this wasn't about you." She just rolled her eyes at you, ed away, leaving me standing there, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Jason was furious when I told him about the conversation. "You don't owe her an explanation," he said. "She's making this about her, and it's not." Still, I couldn't shake the knot. My parents, meanwhile, kept urging me to be the bigger person. They asked me to apologize, to try harder to patch things up with Camille. It felt like they were siding with her, justifying her behavior by saying she was hurt or emotional. Hurt about what? My engagement wasn't a personal attack. As the weeks passed, Camille attacked-y aggressive comments turned into full-blown avoidance. She stopped showing up at family events entirely. Eric, her boyfriend, apologized to me privately, saying he felt bad about the whole situation. "She's been putting a lot of pressure on me to propose," he admitted, looking uncomfortable. "I wasn't ready, and I think it's spilling over." I didn't know what to say. It wover. Faulty hadn't proposed yet, but somehow I'd become the target for all their frustrations. My parents suggested I stop talking about the wedding altogether, at least until Camille came around. But it felt wrong to hide my joy just to appease her. The weight of it all was exhausting. Her interaction with Camille was a landmine, and every family dinner felt like walking on eggshells. Jason and I decided to keep our wedding plans low-key. No big announcements, no social media updates. Even so, rumors swirled and Camille kept stoking the fire, making me out to be the villain of some twisted narrative. For the first time in my life, a narrative. Wonder if our relationship was even salvageable. Camille wasn't just upset, she was actively tearing me down, and I didn't know how much more I could take. I thought I'd hit my breaking point, but Take.lay had more surprises in store. Out of nowhere, she messaged me one evening, demanding I push back my wedding date. According to her, having two weddings close together would force the family to choose, and put too much stress on her. She framed it as though it was for everyone's benefit, but I knew the truth. She didn't want our weddings to overlap because she didn't want to share the spotlight. Her exact words still ring in my e-spotlight. Ready ruined my engagement timeline, and now you're going to overshadow my wedding too? It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. "If you don't move your wedding, I won't come," she added. I stared at the message, my heart pounding added, a mix of anger and disbelief. Jason was sitting next to me, and when I showed him the text, his jaw tightened. "You're not seriously considering this, are you?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "No," I said immediately. "I'm not moving a firm.ng." When I replied to Camille, I kept it short wedding. "Rye, you feel that way, but we're keeping our date. I hope you'll still come." Her response was as predictable as it was cuddicum. You're choosing a wedding over family. Don't expect me to pretend to be happy for you. Word of the ultimatum spread quickly. My parents saw me that night, urging me to reconsider. Camille's been waiting for this for so long, my mom said. Can't you just compromise for the sake of the family? I couldn't believe it. They were asking me to re-a-family, a biggest day of my life to accommodate Camille's insecurities. Jason overheard the conversation and took the phone from me. With all due respect, this isn't fair to Mara, or to us, he said, his voice steady but firm. We're not changing our plans. That should have been the end of it, but of course, plans. Camille's resentment only grew, and soon after, strange things started happening with our wedding vendors. First, our florist called to confirm a cancellation request, one I hadn't made. I managed to fix it, but then another vendor mentioned receiving a similar call. The timing felt too coincidental. I didn't have proof, but deep down, I knew who was behind it. When I confronted Camille about the cancellations, she acted offended. Why would I do something like that? She said, her voice dripping with mock innocence. You're paranoid. But when I asked for an apology, she refused. I'm no paranoid. Apologize for something I didn't do, she said, crossing her arms. Maybe you should stop looking for reasons to blame me. The conversation left me shaking with frustration. Jason, Evim, Rock pulled me into a hug when I told him what happened. You don't need to keep engaging with her, he said. She's not interested in fixing this, Mara. It was hard to admit, but he was right. Camille wasn't just you, Mara. E was actively trying to sabotage my happiness. The tension between us had reached a boiling point, and I didn't know how much more I could take. Around this time, Camille finally got engaged. Eric proposed to take a quiet, private moment at home. She announced it on social media with a simple caption, "Finally engaged to the love of my life." While I wanted to be happy for her, the timing felt deliberate, almost like she wanted to one-up me. Within days, she started making comparisons between our engagements. She told anyone who would listen how her proposal was intimate and meaningful, while mine was over the top. The digs didn't stop there. At family gatherings, she'd make snide top NTs about how some people need a show to feel special. On Instagram, she posted cryptic messages about fake family loyalty and how real love doesn't need an audience. It was painfully obvious they were directed at me, but I stayed silent. Responding would only add fuel to the fire. The family divide deepened. Some relatives sided with Camille, saying Fire Da waited her turn and deserved her moment. Others supported me, insisting I shouldn't have to put my life on hold. It felt like everyone had an opinion, and I was caught in the middle of a storm I didn't ask for. As if the situation wasn't bad enough, Camille announced her wedding de 4.c 2 weeks before mine. The news sent shockwaves through the family. Relatives started calling, asking if I'd reschedule to avoid the overlap. My parents, predictably, echoed the same sentiment. Camille set her date first. Can't you be the bigger person? But I refused to budge. Jason and I had already put down deposits, Sepperson v. the dates, and built our plans around that date. Changing everything wasn't an option, nor was it fair. The pressure kept mounting, though. Every conversation with my parents and fair.guilt-tripping comma and mutual friends started pulling away, not wanting to get caught in the middle. Camille, meanwhile, continued her passive-aggressive social media campaign, framing herself as the victim of my supposed selfishness. I tried to focus on the joy of planning my wedding, but it was hard selfishness. When every step forward felt overshadowed by drama. Jason reminded me time and time again, "This day is about us, Mara, not her. Don't let her ruin it." He was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier. Camille was no longer a thorn in my side. She was an active force working against me. And I was starting to realize that no amount of reasoning or compromise would fix what she'd already decided. In her mind, I was the enemy. As the wedding dates drew closer, the tension between Camille and me escalated enemy.int I never thought possible. Every interaction, every family gathering, and even every piece of wedding planning felt like a battle. I had tried my best to stay focused on my happiness, but Camille wasn't going to let that happen. Her social media posts became bolder, more pointed. She began sharing cryptic kahappen.ike, loyalty isn't about blood, it's about who stands by you, and Some people just can't let others have their blood. It didn't take a genius to figure out they were aimed at me. The comments on her posts were filled with supportive messages from friends and family who clearly only knew her side of the story. But the worst was still to come. One evening, I got a call from my photographer. Story. Received another supposed Cancicum Dawn request. My heart sank, and my mind raced as I tried to figure out how to handle this latest sabotage. Thankfully, the photographer called to confirm before taking any action, and I was able to salvage the booking. Still, the pattern was undeniable. Whoever was making these calls was doing it to disrupt my wedding, and I didn't need to guess who it was. Jason, always calm in a storm, encouraged me to stay strong. Let her play her games, he was. We'll rise above it. This is about us, not her. But the cracks in our family were becoming impossible to ignore. Relatives started openly seeing how inconvenient it was to have two weddings so close together. Some made subtle digs about how I was forcing people to choose by not rescheduling. Others outright suggested I should be the one to move my date since Camille had been waiting longer. I tried to let it roll off my back, but the constant whispers and judgment wore me down. Longers weren't helping either. They were firmly in Camille's corner, urging me to be the bigger person and suggesting I apologize to smooth things over. The more they pushed, the more I felt like I was being punished for simply living my life. Then came the family dinner that broke the camel's back. Camille, emboldened by the growing delight, openly questioned whether she should even invite me to her wedding. It might save everyone the awkwardness, she said with a smug smile, as though she was doing me a favor. My parents said nothing, their silence louder than any words could have been. I felt the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let her see me cry. Jason, bin ong my distress, reached for my hand under the table and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Later that night, he told me, "Enough is enough. We don't need to put up with this anymore." I wasn't sure what to do. Cutting ties with my sister felt extreme, but her behavior was relevant more. And Eric, her fiancé, privately admitted to me that her obsession with winning was causing tension between them. "I just want her to focus on us, not this competition," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. But Camille wasn't slowing down. The day after the family dinner, she announced her wedding Visostion del Media. It was a sprawling, luxurious estate with grand halls and immaculate gardens. Within hours, mutual friends started comparing our venues, noting how hers was so elegant, while ours was nice but simple. It wasn't a competition to me, but clearly it was to her, and to everyone watching. As the wedding planning continued, I began to hear more whispers from family members about how watching struggling to finalize her details. Her venue wasn't fully confirmed, and there were rumors of issues with her catering. Despite all this, she found time to keep stirring the pot. During one family gathering, she loudly declared that my wedding was going to feel rushed, while hers was all about patience and perseverance. The comments stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to stoop to her level. Jason reminded me perseverance. Reaction, don't give her the satisfaction. Things took a darker turn when a mutual friend showed me screenshots of a group chat Camille was satisfaction. Messages? She accused me of deliberately overshadowing her, and even joked about how funny it would be to mess with my wedding plans. While she didn't admit outright to the vendor sabotage, the tone of her messages was enough to make my blood boil. I sent the screenshots to my parents, hoping they'd finally understand the extent of her behavior. Instead, Boyle.ru shed it off, saying, "She's just venting. Don't take it so seriously." I felt like I was screaming into a void. How could they keep defending her when she was so clearly out of line? In a last-ditch effort to salvage some semblance of peace, I suggested family therapy again. My parents were but Camille refused, saying, "I don't need therapy. I'm not the one causing problems." Her refusal felt like the final nail in the coffin. Jason and I pressed forward with our plans, determined not to let her ruin our day. We finalized our guest list RM'd our vendors, and even picked out wedding favors. With every detail checked off the list, I felt a small sense of relief, but it was always shadowed by the drama looming over us. Even as I focused on moving forward, Camille's actions made it clear she wasn't done. Her social media posts grew bows, her digs more personal. She was determined to make me the villain in her story, and I was running out of energy to fight it. The closer my wedding day came, the more chaotic everything became. Camille's wedding took place just 2 weeks before and it was every bit the spectacle she'd been hinting at. The estate venue, the elaborate decor, the massive guest list. It was a statement, loud and clear. Jason and I decided to attend, hoping to avoid further drama, but the tension was palpable from the moment we arrived. Camille barely acknowledged us. Throughout the ceremony and reception, she stayed surrounded by her friends, acting arrived, wasn't even there. I tried to keep a low profile, sticking close to Jason, but she wasn't content with just ignoring me. During her reception toast, she made a thinly veiled dig saying, "Patience and perseverance are the keys to real love. Some people rush into things for appearances, but true love is worth the wait." The room went awkwardly silent for a beat before someone clapped to break the tension. I clenched my jaw and focused on waiting, trying to hold back tears. Jason gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, and we left the reception early, both of us exhausted from the emotional strain. After her wedding, Camille's social media exploded with posts showcasing her big day. Captions like, "Finally my moment strain," "Happiest day of my life surrounded by real love" flooded my feed. Although I'd blocked her by this point, the screenshots poured in from friends and family who couldn't resist sharing the drama. It was clear she was drawing a line between her wedding and mine, framing hers as the real celebration of love. As my wedding day approached, the comparisons grew louder. Family members who'd attended her wedding made subtle comments like, "Our sister's dress was so elegant," or "Her reception hall was breathtaking." It felt like a competition I never signed up for, and no matter what I did, I was already losing. The morning of my wedding, Camille showed up late. She strolled in wearing a white floor-length dress that could have easily mistaken for a bridal gown. When my maid of honor, Rachel, politely pointed out the faux pas, Camille shrugged and said, "Oh, I didn't realize it was a big deal." I wanted to scream, but I refused to let her ruin the day I had been dreaming of. Jason noticed my frustration and quietly reasdeal. Focus on us, Mara. She doesn't matter today." The ceremony went beautifully, despite the tension, but Camille couldn't resist stirring the pot during the reception. She gave today. Starting with a sweet introduction before turning it into a backhanded attack. "Every bride deserves her moment, even if it's not the first one in the family," she said with a smirk. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Jason looked like he was barely holding back from saying something. After her toast, Jason pulled her aside and firmly asked her to stop. From what he later told me, she dismissed him, claiming a joke, and that he was overreacting. The final straw came during the group photos. While we were posing for family pictures, Camille loudly remarked, "Your dress is simple but cute." Everyone heard it. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but I forced a smile for the camera. When the day was finally over, I broke down in private with Rachel. She hugged me tightly and said, "Mara, everyone can see through camera.vor. This day was about you and Jason, and nothing she did can take that away." Her words gave me some comfort, but the damage was done. In the days that followed, I learned from guests that Camille had spent much of the reception gossiping. She'd told people I had intentai done, scheduled my wedding close to hers, and made passive-aggressive comments about my choices. When I confronted my parents about her behavior, they brushed it off again. "She's just emotional," my mom said. "You need to understand where she's coming from." That was the breaking point for me. I blocked Camille on all platforms and decided to go no contact. Jason supported me completely, that we were building a life together and didn't need to carry the weight of her toxicity. Weeks later, Camille posted another cryptic story on social media, tagging mutual friends and writing, "Not all family deserves loyalty. Toxicity. Respond." I was done engaging in her games. Instead, I started attending therapy to process everything. My therapist helped me see that I couldn't control Camille's actions, but I could set boundaries to protect myself. Jason suggested making the no-contact decision permanent, at least for a while. It was a hard choice, but it felt like the right one. I charmyself.in al update on Reddit, detailing everything that had happened. The competing weddings, the sabotage attempts, the family divide. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive, with people encouraging me to focus on my marriage and let go of the toxic relationship with Camille. Now, as I look back on everything, I feel a strange mix of sadness and relief. I never imagined my sister would become a source of so much Camille. I've accepted that I can't change her. What I can do is choose my own happiness and prioritize the people who truly support me. Jason and I are planning our honeymoon now, excited to start this new chapter together. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with me, LA, but for now, I'm choosing peace, for myself and for my marriage. Story 2. I'm a 28-year-old lady who recently accomplished a significant life objective. I saved and budgeted for years before purchasing my first house. I finally found a tiny, comfortable home in a good area. Although it wasn't particularly elegant, it was ideal for me, a place that I could be my own. I was ecstatic since it felt like my greatest life achievement. When I told my parents that they had volunteered to help with some minor modifications, they were overjoyed, which I felt was quite kind of them. They said it was simply their way of helping me, but it seemed like a wonderful way to celebrate this new chapter. I consented, assuming it would only involve light painting or perhaps some gardening. However, they were thrilled, and the upgrades soon became frequent trips. It was pleasant to have them around at first, but their helpful visits became a bit too regular. They always bring a new acquaintance or a distant cousin to check on the house's development when they drop by unexpectedly. I dismissed it as them being happy of my accomplishment, even though I felt it was a little excessive. My younger sister Jenna is kind of the family's golden child, so they've always enjoyed flaunting our family's achievements. My parents have always focused their attention on Jenna, who is 3 years younger than me. As she grew older, they went above and above to fulfill her every need. It was no secret that my sister received far more than I did, despite the fact that I adore her. If she desired anything, they bring it to pass. Her partner, who likewise seemed to enjoy the better things in life, just proposed to her. She has been organizing a royal-style wedding, but she lacks the funds to pull it off. I once overheard my parents discussing how costly Jenna's wedding was becoming. As they continued to talk about how the expenses were always rising, they sounded anxious. At the time, I didn't really pay attention. They were obviously under pressure, but it seemed logical that they would want to make her day memorable. Then suddenly, odd things began to happen. My parents started questioning me about how much I still owed on my mortgage and the worth of my property. They even inquired as to whether I had ever considered refinancing. It struck me as strange, but I didn't give it much attention. I thought they were merely inquisitive because they had never shown any interest in my finances previously. They asked me to join them for a family dinner a week later. They also asked me to bring my property and mortgage documentation in case something went wrong. Although it was purportedly for safety, it didn't seem required. Nevertheless, I accepted, since I didn't want to start a fight. In retrospect, I ought to have been more wary. I began to hear tales from my neighbors at this time. They would casually say that they had seen an internet listing for a property similar to mine. Despite my confusion, I dismissed it as a coincidence. Then I received a link from a friend to a real estate listing that included pictures of the inside of my house. The photos were taken during the remodeling projects my parents had been working on. I have no idea how or why my house was put up for sale. I addressed my parents in disbelief. They pretended they had no idea what I was talking about right away. They dismissed it, supposing it was an error of some sort. I was turned off by their contemptuous tone. They hardly responded to this terrible situation. Although I couldn't pinpoint it, I had the impression that they weren't telling me anything. My bank then contacted a few days later. They needed to verify a recent question about the status of my mortgage, an inquiry from a family member with permission. This was new to me because I hadn't given anyone permission to see my mortgage information. A feeling of perplexity and terror washed over me. Who else could have attempted to get into my account? Though I was still hoping it was some major misunderstanding, the pieces were beginning to fit together. A real estate representative knocking on my door to offer a tour of the home was the last straw. It dawned on me then. Without a doubt, my house was for sale, and my family was the ones who owned it, under the pretense of remodeling assistance. They had listed my house behind my back in order to get entry and take the necessary pictures. I was feeling both betrayed and shocked as I stood in my living room with a real estate salesperson I had never met. How were my parents able to achieve this? It felt unreal, like something from a nightmare. Update 1. I went directly to my parents after finding out about the house listing and making the connections. This time I presented them with evidence. The real estate listing link, which includes pictures of my property taken during their restoration trips. They were no longer able to feign in light of this indisputable proof. They initially attempted to dismiss it as a miscommunication, claiming that they had been looking into possibilities in case I ever made the decision to sell. However, I resisted, asking for a direct explanation of why they listed my house without consulting me. At last, they acknowledged it. In order to raise money for Jenny's ideal wedding, they had listed the property. They said it was all for the happiness of the family. It seemed only right that I assist Janet in realizing her goal of home ownership, as I had already accomplished mine. They continued by saying that Gina should have the wedding of her dreams, and that my home's equity might help make it happen. Since they had assisted me in purchasing my house, my parents genuinely felt they had a voice in how it was utilized. Disregarding the fact that their assistance during renovations was limited to a little amount of free work. It was astounding how entitled they were. They refused to let up even though I made it very plain that my property was not for sale and that it was not a bank to pay for Jenna's lavish wedding. They used every strategy in the book, including guilt-tripping me. They reminded me of how much they had done for me as I grew up and emphasized that I was prioritizing money over family happiness. In addition to rejecting Jenny's goal, my unwillingness to sell the house was a rejection of the entire family. I didn't move. I reiterated that they had gone too far by listing the home without my consent and that it was not for sale. After that, Jenna herself called. She told me that I was spoiling her wedding and accused me of being selfish while sobbing. She said I had no right to refuse her this one item since I was prioritizing my home over her pleasure. Following the years of support I had received from my family, even though it hurt to hear those comments, I refused to back down and told her that I wasn't required to sell my house to pay for her wedding. I then shared the entire tale with a select group of close pals. They instantly informed me that I had every right to defend my house since they were just as astonished as I was. They reminded me that my family's actions were completely inappropriate and urged me to defend my position. I realized after speaking with them how incorrect it was for my sister and dad to believe they had any rights to my belongings. The family was promptly informed, and opinions differed. My parents listing my house without my consent was absurd, according to several relatives who felt sorry for me. Others, however, took my parents' side and insisted that I assist in order to maintain family harmony. The fact that I refused to give up my house for a wedding made me feel like the antagonist in this bizarre tale. My parents gave me an ultimatum a few days later. The family would be disappointed if I didn't agree to sell the house voluntarily. They made it plain that I would effectively be disowned if I didn't follow their rules. Hearing my own parents make such a severe decision over a wedding that actually had nothing to do with me was unreal. I realized then that I needed legal counsel. I contacted a lawyer and gave them the full rundown. Although he encouraged me to take certain precautions, the lawyer reassured me that my family could not lawfully sell my property without my permission. To make sure that nobody could enter the property without my consent, I need first change all of the locks. They also advised protecting valuables and any important papers, just in case my parents tried to meddle any further. I quickly heeded their instructions, protecting my documents and changing the locks. My parents, however, didn't stop there. They took to social media shortly after a confrontation to vent their frustrations. They wrote lengthy, dramatic status updates about how I had abandoned the family and was squandering money that could have helped my sister realize her dreams. They portrayed me as a cold-blooded villain, which prompted a barrage of remarks from friends, family, and distant relatives, the majority of whom were unaware of the whole situation. Seeing people I hardly knew criticizing me hurt, but I didn't let it change my mind. Jenny's fiancé then became involved. In an attempt to reason with me, he reached out and suggested that I think about the family's desires and assess how much joy I could bring by making a small sacrifice. It was obvious that the pressure would only increase. I came to the realization that I needed to be ready for a much larger conflict if I wanted to defend my house and myself. Armed with that determination, I readied myself for whatever lay ahead. This was no longer a wedding or a house. It was about defending my rights and standing up for myself. Update 2. I knew I needed to do something after speaking with the lawyer. In order to get my parents to take down the listing and stop any illegal activity involving my property, my lawyer wrote a cease and desist letter. It stated unequivocally that they had no legal claim to the house and that any additional meddling could have dire repercussions. My parents' response to the letter was immediate and strong. They were enraged. Rather than give up, they called the letter a betrayal and accused me of legal harassment. They said that because I was selfishly refusing to support my sister's wedding, I was causing needless drama within the family. That letter turned out to be the decisive factor, increasing the already widening gap between us. My parents chose to escalate the situation online, in addition to refusing to accept any responsibility. They portrayed me as the bad guy who was destroying the family over a small amount of money in a string of dramatic social media status updates. My mother shared on social media how I had betrayed the family and how devastated she was that I would put money before love. People who didn't know the whole story would assume I had done something horrible because the posts were so ambiguous. It didn't take long for family friends and distant relatives to begin praising them in comments. Some even accused me of being cold-hearted in direct messages. Jenna chose to face me directly just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. She was obviously upset when she unexpectedly showed up at my house. She continued by saying that my house had always been family property and that I was envious of her happiness. She said that when the family needed it for something as significant as her wedding, I had no right to keep it all to myself. I didn't raise my voice or get angry. I just clarified that the house was bought with my own hard-earned money, that it was legally mine, and that I had no intention of giving it up. That only seemed to make her angrier. She stormed off, leaving me to wonder how things had escalated so quickly. The next day, my parents called with a new demand. Since I wasn't willing to sell the house, they insisted I give them a large loan instead. They argued that as a family, I had an obligation to help them in any way I could, especially considering the once-in-a-lifetime nature of Jenna's wedding. I stayed calm and told them no, I didn't owe them anything, and their demands were getting out of hand. Their response was to cut off communication with me altogether. They stopped inviting me to family gatherings, and soon I started hearing from other family members who implied that I was the one who had abandoned everyone. It became clear that my parents were trying to isolate me, hoping the silent treatment would make me rethink my decision. The exclusion hurt, but my close friends stood by me. They reminded me that I was doing the right thing, and without their support, I'm not sure how I would have managed to keep my resolve. A few days later, I received a call from the real estate agent who had shown up at my house before. They informed me that after the cease and desist letter, my parents had finally removed the listing. It was a relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. My suspicions were confirmed shortly after, when I came home one evening and noticed that my locks looked different. It was subtle, but I could tell they had been tampered with. My first thought was that someone had tried to break in, possibly in retaliation for the legal letter. I immediately called a locksmith to replace all the locks again, and decided it was time to install a security system. I didn't want to believe that my own family could stoop to this level, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't take any chances. The stress was starting to take a toll on me. I decided to start therapy, to work through the emotional mess that this family betrayal had left me with. Every session helped me unpack the layers of guilt and manipulation that I hadn't even realized were affecting me. The therapist helped me see how deeply rooted these family dynamics were, and how setting boundaries, even with family, was okay. But my parents didn't stop. They continued their smear campaign within the extended family, creating a narrative where I was the selfish daughter who cared more about her money than keeping the family together. The story spread quickly, And before long, I was getting messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all expressing disappointment and accusing me of destroying family unity. In response, I started documenting every interaction with my parents, Jenna, and any family members who reached out. I needed a thorough record of everything that had been said and done, just in case things escalated again. Keeping a journal also provided me a sense of control over the issue, as if I were finally taking efforts to protect myself entirely. Despite the pandemonium, I found my determination getting stronger. Every attempt to guilt trip me. Every rumor they propagated it all reaffirmed that I had made the proper choice. I wasn't going to allow anyone, not even my family, destroy the life I'd fought so hard to construct. Update 3. Notwithstanding everything that had transpired, I ended myself attending a family reunion a few weeks later. I knew I'd be heading into a heated situation, but a part of me wanted to put the record right with everyone who had been deceived by my parents' one-sided account of events. I braced myself for anything, knowing that this could be the only chance I'd get to communicate the reality to certain relatives who had entirely bought into my parents' lie. As soon as I arrived, the tension was evident. Some relatives flashed me condemning stares, while others appeared uncomfortable but fascinated. It didn't take long for someone to bring up the subject in a not-so-subtle way, wondering why I was refusing to support the family during such a critical time. That was my opener. I gently described the entire scenario, starting with how my parents had advertised my house without my knowledge or approval. I spelled out how they tried to bully me into selling my own house to pay for Jenna's wedding, and how, when I refused, they moved to spreading stories and isolating me. The room grew quieter as I talked more. When they heard the entire narrative for the first time, several family members were surprised. Others continued to express skepticism, clinging to the idea that my parents must have meant well. Having to be put on the spot annoyed my parents. They started yelling that I had turned everyone against them and that I was a family outcast who had always prioritized myself over everyone else. It was a tremendous response, just what I had anticipated. However, they did not benefit from their fury. In fact, other family members came out to express their shock at my parents' transgressions, claiming they had no clue things had gone so out of control. I had hoped that things would calm down when Jenna arrived. She barged into the discussion, blaming me once more of destroying her wedding and robbing her of her happiness. She continued by saying that she had always dreamed of her special day, and that the only reason she couldn't have it was because of my selfishness. Her fiancé stood close by, clearly uneasy, but remained silent. I wasn't going to allow her to guilt-trip me this time. Maintaining my composure, I informed her that I was perfectly entitled to keep my house and that I was not responsible for her wedding. I had had enough by then. I addressed everyone and threatened to pursue more legal action if my parents or anybody else persisted in interfering with my life. I had had enough of the rumors, the guilt-tripping, and the manipulation. There would be repercussions for any effort to coerce me or ruin my life. Even my parents appeared surprised by my resolve, and the room went silent. Things began to change after that altercation. Some members of my extended family approached me in private to offer their condolences and to apologize for falling for the stories. They acknowledged that they had been influenced by my parents' internet statements and were unaware of the severity of the issues I had been facing. It seemed like a little triumph, being aware that at least some individuals sympathized with me. Encouraged, I made the decision to post the narrative online. I posted a thorough explanation of everything that had transpired, including the home listing and the family's increasingly aggressive actions, on a forum. The account was honest and unvarnished, but I didn't include any names. The reaction was tremendous. Thousands of individuals left supportive comments and even shared personal experiences of familial betrayal. Many urged me to be resilient, emphasizing that despite the agony, establishing boundaries was crucial. It was not long before my folks learned about the post. They were incensed and insisted that I remove it, saying it violated their privacy as a family. Suddenly, they were worried about harm to their reputation. Seemed to be unaware that their own social media effort had already caused a great deal of damage. I declined. I informed them that I would maintain the post as long as they persisted in spreading false information about me. I was quite entitled to share my perspective. I then concluded that it was time to go all the way. No communication with Jenna or my parents. I told my friends and family not to forward any communications from them, and I banned them on all communication platforms. It was enough. Enforcing firm boundaries was the only way I could protect myself from their poisonous conduct. Jenna's fiancé sent me a private message a week later. He expressed regret for his part in the drama and acknowledged that he was unaware of my parents' deceit. He further claimed that he had attempted to discuss with Jenna the possibility of going forward without using my house money, but she had refused to listen. I thanked him for getting in touch, but I felt that because my family was no longer in my life, it was still too little, too late. At long last, I was relieved. I felt reassured by the security system I put in place, and it was empowering to know that I once again had complete control over my house. I surrounded myself with people who had always been there for me and concentrated on re-establishing my stability. They were my adopted family, the individuals I knew I could always rely on. In order to create happy memories in my house, I began to discover new ways to enjoy my space, like taking up hobbies and even throwing little get-togethers with friends. Knowing that I was no longer burdened by the drama and manipulation that had plagued me for so long made me feel more at ease every day. I was finally coming to the end of that chapter with my family and ready to move on. Establishing a life characterized by autonomy, respect, and trust. This experience taught me a lot, and if I were to take away one lesson from it, it would be the value of establishing boundaries and advocating for oneself, whomever was on the other side. A few weeks passed without hearing from my sister or parents. Just when I was starting to get used to the quiet, I suddenly received an email from them. "Let's Make Amends" was the title. They wrote of their desire to bring the family back together after realizing the mistakes of their ways. Jenna's wedding was just a few weeks away, so the timing seemed off. Subtle clues abound in the letter, which emphasized how great it would be if I could get over our history and think about helping with the wedding. Presenting it as an opportunity for a new beginning. They proposed that we have a face-to-face meeting to discuss the situation. They sounded too nice, as though they wanted me to forget what had occurred. I contemplated answering, well aware that it may be just another effort to control me. When I told my buddies about the email, they were dubious right away, which made me realize how deceptive my family had always been. Even still, there was a part of me that wanted to face them one last time to get an honest response. I so made the decision to meet them, but I was well prepared this time. A close buddy agreed to accompany me and wait close by in case things got out of control after I told them about the meeting. In order to prevent future misunderstandings, I also recorded the entire talk on my phone. We decided to meet in a peaceful cafe on the outskirts of town, which would be a neutral venue. Feeling an odd mixture of nervousness and resolve, I came early and waited. When my parents arrived on schedule, I was shocked to see Jenna alongside them, who seemed determined to impress me. As soon as we took a seat, they started out with an emotional statement in which they expressed how much they missed me and how, in the end, family was all that counted. In an effort to evoke sentimental moments, they talked about family holidays and customs and shared happy recollections. Silently, I waited for any indications of sincere regret, but their conversation soon changed, and they were talking about Jenna's wedding again. My parents began to apologize, but they did so with justifications. They explained that they were acting out of love and desperation to keep the family together. They denied marketing my property without my consent, claiming that the wedding's costs had driven them to the breaking point. Soon after, they resumed implying that a minor donation from me would resolve the issue. I maintained my composure and reiterated that the house was definitely not for sale and that I would not be offering any financial support. I informed them that they had gone too far and that I had no desire to sponsor a lavish wedding that was unrelated to me. Their calm exterior appeared to be broken by my refusal. With a look of frustration on his face, my father leaned in and accused me of abandoning the family. "I am appreciative of what they have given up." He said that they need to repay me now for all that they had done for me over the years. My mother joined in when they needed me the most, telling me that they had always placed their family first and that they expected me to do the same. She looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and rage. Jenna, who had been sitting calmly up until that point, started crying. She branded me selfish and accused me of spoiling her ideal day, as though I had a duty to support her wedding. She claimed that she was shocked that her own sister would take away her one opportunity to enjoy the wedding of her dreams. Her voice was loud enough to catch the attention of everyone in the vicinity. I remained calm and turned the discussion into a public spectacle, understanding that any emotional reaction would only serve to support their story. I reminded them calmly that my choice was final. I informed them that their predicament was their own doing and that I was under no obligation to correct it. I made it plain that I wouldn't think twice about taking more legal action if they tried to meddle in any way or tried to control me anymore. They went silent when they saw their strategies were failing. Clearly shocked by my reluctance to give in, my parents exchanged glances. Jenna was taken aback, as if she hadn't anticipated my refusal to back down in front of everyone. They sat there in amazement and bewilderment as I collected my belongings, got up, and left. I was overcome with a sense of finality after that meeting. I thought for the first time that I had really crossed the line and put an end to their deceptive practices. It was freeing to know that they could no longer control me. Update 5. I firmly decided to cut off all communication with my sister and parents following the public altercation. I made sure they couldn't get in touch with me directly by blocking them on all platforms and phone numbers. I anticipated that they wouldn't take it well, and sure enough, their annoyances were expressed on social media. Within days, my parents began to write about betrayal and commitment to the family, portraying themselves as the victims of a daughter who had abandoned them. They highlighted their efforts and hinted that I had deserted the family at their most vulnerable time. The repercussions quickly spread. Members of my extended relatives who had viewed the posts began to message me. While some quietly provided support, saying they had heard my side and believed my parents had gone too far, others pushed me to change my mind and get back in touch with relatives. A few family members acknowledged that my parents' dramatic tweets had taken them by surprise, but they now saw how manipulative the entire scenario had become. I kept going to therapy around this time, which assisted me in processing the emotional toll of severing my ties to my family. Reminding me that my limits were healthy and essential, the therapist helped me process the shame and uncertainty that persisted. I felt more valuable after resolving these emotions and realizing that I wasn't in charge of cleaning up the mess my parents had made. During this time, my friends were my pillar of support. They came together in support of me, demonstrating that I wasn't the only one who made this choice. As we got to know one another, we became a sort of chosen family that I could trust without worrying about being taken advantage of or judged. I began to see my house as a haven of safety and independence after realizing that I had people on my side, which supported my decision to remain steadfast. Once more, per my attorney's recommendation, I kept a record of every conversation and event, including my parents' attempts to list my house without my consent. I felt more at ease knowing that I was legally ready in case they tried anything else, since this gave me a documented trail. The attorney told me that my parents had no legitimate claim to my money and that I had good reason to safeguard them. Then, out of the blue, Jenna's fiancé sent me a message. In a private apology, he acknowledged that he had not fully comprehended the magnitude of my parents' behavior. He claimed that he was unaware of the strain they were placing on me since he had been preoccupied with the wedding preparations. I was a little taken aback, but I was grateful for the apologies. With my family out of the picture, it was one of the few sincere moments throughout the whole experience. I concentrated on making sure I had enough money. As I looked over my money, I was struck by how much I valued the independence I had achieved. Knowing that I had worked hard to maintain my house my own, the experience increased my appreciation for it. I created a financial plan to make sure I could handle any difficulties down the road without assistance from others, reaffirming my will to be independent. When members of my extended family learned about my parents' behavior, things started to change. Some family members cut ties with my parents after being horrified at the extent to which they had manipulated me. Although unexpected, the support was comforting. People were starting to see that I wasn't the egotistical individual my parents had attempted to portray me as. The dynamics of the family changed, with several members publicly denouncing the actions of my parents. As time went on, I discovered that I was drawn to new experiences and personal development. I started doing things I had always wanted to do, hosted a modest welcome party with friends, and joined a local book club. It felt amazing since it was the first time I had ever entertained guests in my house without any underlying tension or expectations. Positively reclaiming my space served as a reminder that my house now represented my freedom. My parents would occasionally attempt to contact me through distant family members or through notes filled with remorse, but I consistently rejected their efforts. I realized that these motions were only another method they were trying to manipulate me and draw me back into their web. I knew better by now. I would never forget how they treated me or the extent to which they tried to manipulate my life. No matter how much guilt-tripping I did, I found out via common acquaintances that Jenna's wedding had been drastically reduced in scope because of budgetary limitations. I briefly felt sorry for her, but I soon reminded myself that it was the result of decisions she and my parents had made. Without thinking twice, they drew me into their schemes and raised irrational expectations. Setting limits and refusing to condone their financial recklessness made me feel valued. The family was still under stress, and I had heard that my parents were having a hard time dealing with the consequences. They appeared to be having conflict with certain family members who had begun to doubt their intentions and behavior. I remained steadfast in my choice to avoid contact in spite of everything, concentrating on starting over and moving on from the family turmoil. I became aware of how much I had changed as a result of this experience. Although it had hurt, setting limits was essential. I discovered how to put my own health first, and I felt genuinely powerful for the first time. I talked about my experience online and gave guidance to those going through similar things, stressing the need of independence and self-respect. People thanked me for sharing my story and urged me to persevere, and the replies were overwhelmingly positive. Ultimately, I took comfort in the knowledge that respect and autonomy, rather than coercion or duty, would determine my destiny. I learned from this experience that personal boundaries shouldn't be sacrificed for familial ties, and I was at last prepared to put the past and the turmoil behind me. Story 3. I'm 56 years old, and up until recently, I lived alone in a small but comfortable 2-bedroom house that I had put a lot of effort into maintaining. Before my son, his wife, and their 2 small children lost their house, everything was calm, predictable, and quiet. They came to me because they were having financial difficulties and had nowhere else to turn. I didn't hesitate to take them in at first. Since I adore my son, I assumed it would be tolerable when he informed me that it would only last a few months, while they saved money to get back on their feet. Family members are meant to support one another during difficult times, isn't that right? He promised that they would make every effort to maintain order and pay for some bills, and because his wife's career was just getting back on track, I had faith that they would be leaving soon. However, as the months passed, it became evident that some of them were far longer than any of us had anticipated during the first half of the year. Little things began to catch my attention. I had anticipated that they would conserve money, reduce wasteful spending, and look for a property that would be reasonable. However, there was always a reason why it was still too early whenever I asked. At the same time, I observed them spending money on items that didn't seem very economical, including weekend trips, takeout meals, and new toys for the kids. I made an effort to ignore it, reasoning that perhaps they were simply little joys to help me get through a difficult moment. But little problems grew into major ones. Once neat and peaceful, the guest room descended into a jumble of toys, clothing, and luggage. My once cozy room suddenly seemed cramped as the living area became their expanded storage area. There was a stroller, a baby bottle, or a toy scattered wherever I looked. I was tidying up after everyone, sweeping away countless crumbs and treading on Legos. It wasn't until it was gone that I understood how much I cherished my privacy and quiet. Then came the commotion. It was difficult to find even a minute of stillness, although I'm not against children being children. They ran up and down the house, knocking things over and disturbing whatever silence I tried to establish for myself. They were so energetic. My nerves were strained since I had moved from a calm to a tumultuous household. My son promised that they were working on it when I made it clear that I needed my own place back. However, there wasn't much to show for it. Slowly, the financial burden became apparent. They said they would help out with food and electricity, but I was usually the one paying for everything. Initially, I didn't mind occasional additional meals, increased utility costs, or anything significant. However, as time went on, the costs continued to mount, and I had to take out more money from savings than I had intended in order to meet the demands of the household. My son would either say they were short on money or offer to help out next month when I brought it up. The following month passed without any changes. I began giving them more pointed clues after almost a year, including when they would be able to locate a place of their own. They only needed a little more time. My son would dismiss it. I felt like my remarks didn't have any weight because every talk ended in the same manner. Then, unexpectedly, they announced that they were expecting a second child. I congratulated them and smiled, but I was feeling a wave of dread on the inside. Having 2 children was challenging enough, but I couldn't fathom how much more hectic life would get with a third. I made an effort to hide my mounting annoyance, but it gradually increased. I felt more and more like a visitor in my own house every day. It was no longer my own haven. Everywhere you looked, there was disorder, clutter, and incessant noise. In order to help out, my son had pledged to start paying the rent, but he was at best erratic with it and frequently forgot until I reminded him. It wasn't much even then. Furniture that had been in my home for years now had fresh stains and scuff marks, making the wear and tear on it more noticeable. Constant usage damaged my kitchen appliances, and the additional stress required repairs for the bathroom. It seemed like they had a new excuse why it couldn't happen yet every time I attempted to encourage them to start looking for a place. I would hear my son tell me that he simply needed more time, more money saved, or for something else to work itself out. I attempted to establish limits and mention the toll this was having on me, but he never seemed to take it seriously. Although I felt resentment at the circumstance, I suppressed it out of concern about causing a family dispute. I knew my son's family was having difficulties, so I didn't want to add to the conflict or drive them away. However, I felt more and more stuck every day, not knowing how to urge them to go without causing friction. I just wanted my space back, a place where I could relax and be myself without having to deal with expectations, noise, or financial strain all the time. I realized that things couldn't continue this way indefinitely, yet the stress kept mounting. I simply didn't know how to express that without endangering my family. One update. I realized that something needed to change after almost a year of this arrangement. I felt it was time to have a serious conversation with my son and his wife since I couldn't continue like this forever. I asked the kids to join me in the kitchen one evening after they had calmed down. I reminded them of the original intention and politely advised that they begin considering moving. This was supposed to be short-term. Knowing how difficult things had been for them, I made an effort to be understanding. But I also had to let them know that it was time to move ahead. Although he nodded in agreement, my son's response was replete with justifications. He clarified that they hadn't saved as much as they had intended due to growing expenses, and it would still take time to locate something that was reasonable. His wife said that it was challenging to balance everything with 2 little children and her meager work schedule. I listened, comprehending what they were saying, but I questioned how long these justifications would last. They reaffirmed their commitment to leave as soon as possible and to begin saving more seriously. Following our conversation, I observed my son attempting to make minor changes about the house. He volunteered to assist with a few household tasks, such as emptying the trash, filling the dishwasher, and cleaning up the children's toys. These were small jobs that hardly touched the surface of the bigger problem, but it seemed like a beginning. I thought they would start conserving money after a few days, but I soon saw they were still spending money on small pleasures. Their little indulgences that didn't quite fit the strict spending plan they outlined were taken out by a new video game. Then came their third child. For me, it was a moment of mixed emotions. Although I was delighted to have another grandson, I also understood that this would only make things more difficult. With a newborn wailing at strange hours, the house was noisier than before. The presence of a newborn appeared to invigorate two other children. Additionally, my son and his spouse are attempting to balance everything while making little headway with their relocation preparations. I began to feel the bodily effects of the stress. I could never find a moment of calm, and I was always tired and tense. My health suffered as well. My headaches increased in frequency, and I was constantly exhausted. One of the children was in my office when I returned home from a doctor's visit one afternoon. I had said that a certain location was off bounds. They were playing with a tiny collection of souvenirs I had on my desk, and they had taken papers off of it. I was aware that my patients were getting tired, but I refrained from losing my temper. Although I tried not to cause a scene, I felt as though a line had been passed when I gently ushered them out. From then on, things just got worse. One day I discovered a cracked antique vase that I'd kept for many years. On another occasion, they used my vacuum to clean up a mess in the child's room. Leaving it clogged around the home, I observed some minor damages, a broken picture frame and a scratch table. Even while each of these things might not seem like much on their own, when together, they seemed like tiny reminders of how out of control my own house had gotten. I made another attempt to discuss increasing my financial contribution with my son. He started contributing a little bit to my rent each month, but it wasn't constant. It would occasionally be late. At other occasions, it wouldn't be as much as agreed. He would tell me that he had forgotten or had an unforeseen cost that month when I reminded him. With additional food, electricity, and now even repairs, I could feel my funds evaporating. I finally came to the conclusion that enough was enough. I gave them a strict 6-month deadline to locate housing of their own. When I brought it up, my son shrugged it off and said they'd figure it out, and he wasn't worried. I had anticipated that setting up a clear time frame would give them the motivation they needed to move out at last. It was simply another casual comment to him. But I was becoming more and more bitter every day. At about the same time, my son's wife said her own family was also unable to accommodate them. Her remark made it apparent that they had no other way out, and that I was the only one they would think about, even though I hadn't mentioned this as a possibility. They seemed to expect me to accept this indefinite arrangement without protest, which left me feeling stuck. As the weeks went by, I couldn't get rid of the thought that perhaps by creating a secure zone, I had contributed to this circumstance. Had I inadvertently made it simple for them to escape accountability? Although I had tried to be a helpful mother and grandmother, it appeared that I had been too accommodating, allowing them to take over my personal space, money, and mental health. I couldn't continue living this way, but I didn't want to drive them away either. It was becoming painfully obvious that nothing would change despite my subtle warnings and gentle prods. This favor was no longer temporary. With no end in sight, it was growing into something far bigger. Even though I still had feelings for my family, I knew I had to plot how to get back my house and my life before it was too late. Update 2. Since 6 months had passed with little to no progress, I made the decision to set some ground rules. It appeared to be a reasonable compromise that would enable me to establish boundaries and recover some personal space without quickly evicting them. I established a list of quiet hours after 9 p.m., prohibited the children from entering specific locations, such as my office, and asked them to tidy up after themselves as soon as possible. I carefully stated everything in the hopes that it may help a little. They nodded first, but nothing changed in reality. When I accidentally left the door open, the children nevertheless barged into my office. Clothes and toys were left all over the place, and it was hard to ignore the commotion after bedtime. My son and his wife seldom acknowledged the standards I had established, and even my requests for some quiet during the day were disregarded. They were behaving like they owned my house exclusively. Additionally, each time I attempted to bring it up, they either dismissed it or joked that children are just children. I convened a family meeting at last. I told them that I couldn't continue in this manner as we sat down in the living room. I discussed the stress it was placing on me, not only monetarily but also emotionally and physically. I made it obvious that I was at my breaking point and that they needed to start showing me respect and abiding by the guidelines we had established. The way my daughter-in-law responded surprised me. She said that I was spending money on family matters and accused me of being self-centered. She said it wasn't fair of me to expect everything to be flawless because they were going through a difficult time. Although I understood this wasn't about perfection, her remarks nonetheless had a powerful impact. It was about my house, my haven, being out of control and unrecognizable. I quickly found myself in the midst of a family split as word of our argument got out to other family members. After spending so much time aiding my son's family, some family members agreed with me that I had every right to establish limits in my own household. Others, however, felt that I was being unreasonable. Some even implied that it was my responsibility as a mother and grandmother to tolerate this for the benefit of the family. It was a challenging situation. Regardless of what I did, I felt judged. I talked to several close friends about my problems, and they urged me to speak up for what I believed in. They reminded me that I had already made a lot of sacrifices to make room for my son's family, and that this was my life and space. Perhaps they needed a little prodding in the right direction, so one buddy advised that I check into inexpensive housing alternatives for them. This gave me the idea to look into local resources, and I even discovered several that fit their budget. My kid reacted negatively when I showed him the possibilities I had discovered. He made me out to be the bad guy for even recommending they go elsewhere, assuming I was keen to get rid of them. He maintained that they only needed more time, and that it was not possible to move at this moment. He ignored my attempt to convey that my own financial resources were running low, as though I were exaggerating the damage or being theatrical. Things reached a boiling point a few days later. We got into a furious dispute, one in which I was unable to contain myself any longer. I spoke out, something I hadn't done in years, and let him know how much this circumstance had affected me personally. I had begun to feel exhausted by the incessant noise, the disregard for my belongings, and the financial burden. I didn't mean to shoo them away. I simply couldn't continue in this manner. My physical health ultimately suffered as a result of the stress. I experienced a mild health scare. It wasn't anything major, but it was enough to make me realize that I couldn't allow this to continue forever. My doctor told me to relax, concentrate on my health, and make every effort to lower my stress levels. With my present living condition, it felt nearly impossible to accomplish that. In need of a solution, I made contact with a neighborhood group that assists families in locating housing. I believed they could help my son's family, but my son dismissed my suggestion that they look into the support as superfluous. He insisted that they would figure it out on their own. Nevertheless, I assumed that my concerns were exaggerated. My desperation increased every day. I had tried all the rules, family meetings, tactful chats, and even outside assistance, but nothing seemed to help. Every time I brought up a problem, they seemed to think I was exaggerating, disregarded my limitations, and disregarded my budgetary constraints. Although I had always supported my son and his family, it was now obvious that they were taking advantage of my generosity. I realized I needed to get ready for a more difficult talk after realizing that soft prods wouldn't work. The third update. I ultimately concluded that I needed to establish a strict deadline after attempting every tactful solution. I sat down with my son and his wife one evening and explained everything in detail. They needed to find a new location within 3 months. They had to take my deadline seriously since this arrangement was no longer viable. I hoped they would see the urgency, so I was direct and firm. I didn't anticipate their response. I could see the pain on my son's and his wife's faces as they were stunned. They said that I had abandoned them and neglected my family when they most needed me. They made me feel bad for setting a boundary now and brought up memories of times when I relied on my family for help. My son continued bringing up the rental market's challenges, their meager savings, and the fact that 3 months wasn't long enough. I didn't move, though. I clarified that although I sympathized with their struggles, the circumstance was interfering with my money, my peace of mind, and my health. I made every effort to make things work, but my house had become an uncomfortable place for me. We had reached my boundaries, and they had to realize that. My son argued that they hadn't saved enough money to move when the topic of money came up. I made an effort to provide recommendations, including looking over their expenses with him to point out areas where they might make savings. I didn't understand how tight things were for them, he said defensively. Regardless of the answers I provided, he was adamant that he would see this as my ejecting them before they were prepared. I began pursuing further actions after realizing that an easy agreement was not going to be the end of things. I called a lawyer the next day to learn more about the eviction rules. Even though I didn't want it to get that bad, I had to be ready in case they wouldn't go. Although I hoped it wouldn't come to that, the lawyer's explanation of my alternatives provided me some peace of mind. I started establishing restrictions with the grandchildren in the interim, letting them know which rooms were now off bounds. Although their parents were reluctant, I tried to explain to them that some areas of the house were adult areas, even though they were too young to completely comprehend. The children appeared to understand the new guidelines, and in the days that followed, I valued the little authority I had over my own house. The tension in the house increased. There was an awkward stillness that pervaded every room as my son and his wife seldom talked to me. Then one day I discovered that my daughter-in-law had posted about this on social media. She expressed her outrage in a lengthy statement that she placed online, portraying me as the bad guy who had betrayed her own family. Family relatives and friends who lived far away reached out. Some were sympathetic, while others were criticizing me for what they perceived to be a callous choice. Divergent views began to flow in. Private messages from several family members expressed their support and understanding of my wish to return home. Others suggested that family should always come first, no matter the cost, and implied that I was being overly strict. It was painful to watch people choose sides and thinking the worst about me, but I was grateful to those who understood and provided words of support. I remained steady in spite of the drama. I thought back to all the times I tried to make this work, and all the things I had done to help my son's family. It was time to take back my own space since I had made enough sacrifices. I heard my son and his wife talking about rental choices over the course of the following several weeks, but he still seemed unsure and cautious. It made me think that they may truly begin to look, and right when it looks like things are moving. One of my relatives made me an unexpected proposition. After learning about the predicament, they contacted me and offered my son's family a modest payment to aid with relocation costs if they agreed to find a place. I told my kid about it in the hopes that it would inspire him to do something since it was a kind gesture. Every encounter was tense, and the silent treatment continued. However, I felt inspired to meet the deadline now that I had the backing of several family members and friends in addition to this unforeseen financial assistance. I wasn't going to back down this time. After giving them every opportunity and act of goodwill I could muster, it was time to act. I was resolved to take back my house, even if it had become unrecognizable. They just had 3 months to go, and for the first time, I was sure that I would see this through to the end. As the last few weeks of the 3-month deadline drew near, I started getting ready physically and emotionally for my son's family to move out. I began tidying up the guest room, putting some of their belongings in boxes with labels, and thoroughly cleaning neglected parts of the home. It seemed unreal, like I was preparing for a new phase of my life. Despite my concern that they would yet attempt to extend the deadline. When my son approached me with a fresh request a week before they were scheduled to go, my fears were confirmed. He said they needed a little more time to get used to their new financial situation, so he asked if they could remain for a few more months. Reminding him of the 3 months we had agreed upon and all the extensions they had previously received, I listened to him but remained strong. This time, I refused to move. Unfazed, he sent me a surprise grocery and utility bill, suggesting that paying it would benefit them. I was aware of his strategy of leveraging guilt to coerce me into extending the deadline. However, I refused to back down, telling him that I couldn't keep paying for unnecessary expenses, especially since they would be departing shortly. He seemed irritated when he departed after our talk, but I wasn't deterred. He eventually revealed that they had located a rental a few days later. Although it was smaller than they had intended, it was immediately accessible and reasonably priced. I could see they weren't very happy about it, but I told him it was a step in the right direction for them to become independent again. Nevertheless, the tension persisted despite the relocation plan. Rather, it expanded. My already aloof daughter-in-law began publicly accusing me of forcing them to leave and forcing them to make do with less than perfect. Since debating wouldn't resolve anything at this point, I made sure my comments were succinct. Even though I knew my grandchildren didn't completely comprehend what was occurring, I spent time with them as moving day drew near. I played their favorite games, read to them, and attempted to explain that even though they would soon be moving to a new place, they could still come visit. It was difficult to say goodbye to them. They gave me a strong embrace and asked why they had to go, so I had to control my feelings and tell them that everything would be well. My son attempted a final guilt trip on the day they were to go. As though to remind me of all the assistance I've gotten over the years, he brought up old recollections of times when I had depended on family. However, I stayed composed and informed him that although I would always be available to them, this arrangement was no longer feasible. He let out a sigh, sent me an unreadable glance, and then turned to go back and pack. However, it wasn't a quiet departure for my daughter-in-law. On social media, she persisted in portraying me as the cruel mother-in-law who had evicted her family during difficult times. Some friends and distant family members expressed support for me, while others made suggestions that I was going too far. I didn't participate. The online community was free to think as it pleased, but I was aware of the truth of what I had done to help them thus far. At last, the home was deserted. The quiet seemed almost surreal after more than a year of commotion, chaos, and stress. I was able to go around my house without bumping into toys or being distracted by conversation for the first time in months. It was strangely silent, and although I was incredibly relieved, I also experienced an unanticipated surge of loneliness. Although I mourned my grandchildren's laughter and the vibrant energy they provided, I told myself that this was what I had desired. I lost my calm with them and my space. I started to fix and clean the house. I fixed the damaged picture frames, took care of the scuff marks on the walls, and thoroughly cleaned the carpets, which had seen more spills than I could count. I walked through every room. I became aware of how much my house had suffered during the previous 12 months. However, I had a sense of healing with every scrub and polish, as if I were taking back my haven one area at a time. As the days went by, I concentrated on my routine and well-being, at last being able to relax without any disruptions. My vitality gradually returned as the tension that had been weighing me down gradually subsided. My headaches subsided, my sleep improved, and I found time for the small joys I had previously neglected. Like curling up with a nice book and a cup of tea. The division within the family persisted in spite of the respite. While some family members still felt I had acted harshly and harbored a secret animosity, others convinced me I had made the correct decision. I started thinking about it all. The lengthy months of conflict, the limits I'd found difficult to establish, and the accumulation of fatigue. Even though it hadn't been simple, I came to the realization that I had been correct to put my own health first. Even though I cherished my family, I couldn't continue to give up my own needs to satisfy their insatiable demands. Ultimately, I realized I had made the proper decision. I was at last able to breathe without feeling overburdened, and my house was once again mine. Update 5. After my son and his family moved out formally, I felt a first wave of relief as the home finally fell into a calm, serene atmosphere that I hadn't seen in more than a year. I discovered that I was enjoying ordinary tasks without interruption because of the newfound comfort that came with the stillness. Reclaiming every room that had been taken over, catching up on reading, and enjoying my morning coffee. The tranquility seemed like a long-lost friend coming back, and I had missed the sense of independence and control. However, it didn't feel really settled. I found myself questioning if I had made the proper decision, particularly in light of my grandchildren. I missed their embraces and giggles, and sometimes I would get guilty and wonder if I might have handled things better. However, I remembered myself of everything I had attempted over the month and realized that I couldn't have done much more without losing my identity. After a week or so of this new schedule, my son began to come frequently, and frequently brought the kids along. The initial visits were fantastic. It was a nice opportunity to catch up when he came over for a little bit and let the kids play in the yard. However, These visits quickly began to go on and on. I observed the children reverting to their former behaviors, leaving toys lying around and exploring the house as though it were still their own dot. Sometimes my kid would leave stuff out or use my kitchenware. A few too many of these prolonged trips had left behind little reminders of the months of upheaval and disorder that had only just begun to end. I needed to establish a firm, yet kind barrier. I informed my son that although they were welcome to come, they could only remain for a certain amount of time because this was no longer their home. There were signs of reluctance, but he nodded as if he understood. He would occasionally comment on how little the new location was, implying that they might take my house for more space if necessary. I responded simply, telling him that they needed to settle into their new house. I began reiterating these limitations over time. I told them that although I enjoyed seeing them, I also wanted my own space, so I established regular visiting hours. My son attempted to break my heart during one visit by pointing out that the children missed returning home and didn't get the need for change. Maintaining my composure, I told them that although I would always be there for them, their home was now elsewhere. Although it wasn't a pleasant chat, it was essential to maintain harmony and well-being. In the middle of everything, I began contacting the family members who had backed my choice. I concentrated on mending fractured relationships and relying on those who had been a rock during this difficult time. Their support strengthened my decision, and I took solace in their comprehension. I was aware that not everyone had been happy with my choice, but those that mattered understood. My kid would occasionally make subtle allusions to money difficulties by bringing up unanticipated costs. Every time I nodded and listened without offering assistance. Although I sympathized with their predicament, I understood that getting involved again would simply revive old wounds, since I had learnt from my errors in the past. In the meantime, my daughter-in-law persisted in her online grievances, accusing me of being the parent who abandoned her family when they were in need. I decided to listen to her side of the story without answering or interacting. She was happy, though, and my family and friends who knew me well supported my choice, and it was sufficient. I finally regained my time and home. I started taking up old pastimes that I hadn't had the time or space for a long time. I started taking morning walks, joined a book group, and even enrolled in a painting class. I felt rejuvenated by the little pleasures that filled the time I had spent handling disorder in the home. My soul felt more liberated, and my house seemed lighter, and I felt completely in charge of my life for the first time in a long time. I occasionally reflect on the months when my son's family's bustle and commotion filled my home. I was aware of the sacrifices I had made during that period, but I also saw the strength that enabled me to finally set my own limits. Yes, the experience had been difficult, but it had also shown me how important it was to keep a place I could really call my own. I had a last, sincere talk with my kid one day. I made it plain that although I cherished them and would always be there for them in times of need, my house was now exclusively mine to enjoy. I told him that this was an opportunity for him and his family to develop independently, and that they had their own house in which to create memories. He seemed to realize that setting these limits wasn't about driving people away, but rather about fostering a better connection going ahead. So he listened politely but grudgingly. Ultimately, I realized it was the correct thing to do to hold my ground, my kid, and I still had a strong link, and I hoped that over time, our relationship would become stronger in a way that met our needs. Now that I had my house back, I could finally look forward to each day with contentment, a sense of purpose, and the liberty to live my life as I saw fit.